You know a show that does just about everything right, has a good run, and then promptly disappears? Well, that's what happened with Code Lyoko. The show is about 4 teenagers who discovered a supercomputer in an abandoned factory. Once activated, the computer opens up access to a virtual world. An evil virus named Xana is roaming around this virtual world, attempting to wreak havoc in the real world. It's up to the team of teenagers to jump into this virtual world, and with the help of a friendly AI named Aelita to stop Xana. Also, for the sake of this video, I'm going to generalize and not go too deep into every specific detail of the show. So if there's anything you want to mention, please leave a comment. Code Lyoko was made by a French animation group, Moonscoop. The show aired during the time where The Matrix was very popular. So the idea of kids having an adventure in a virtual world is one that would be very appealing at the time. I would still watch a show that has that kind of premise today. That is, if it's done right. One difference they did make is that when a character loses in the virtual world, no, they don't actually die, they just come back to the real world. The only exception would be Aelita. So I know this kind of sounds lame, but then you see what kind of damage Xana is trying to do, you realize that yes, this is a major threat. Like literally recreating Chernobyl. I'm not kidding. Season 1, Episode 2 is Xana trying to reroute power to overload a power plant. So the stakes are still very high from episode to episode. Now you do think about the big picture, the plot can kind of fall apart. As in if they shut down the system, Xana is stuck and cannot attack. So instead of the machine constantly being on because reasons, the initial reason is to save Aelita and materialize her to the real world. What is neat about the show is that this is something that comes up somewhat often, where the team has to determine what is actually the best plan of action. Typically this comes down to the kids splitting up, with 1 or 2 of them going to the virtual world, while the other goes back to town to help out with the real world threat. So there is effort to limit any plot holes the show may have. With this said, Xana, the actual threat, can sometimes act more like a ghost than an AI or virus, such as controlling toxic fumes. So there are liberties taken from time to time. The show uses a combination of 2D and 3D animation. With the show airing in 2003 or 2004, the CGI at the time can be very limiting. With this said, CGI as old as this can still look good, and in my opinion, Code Lyoko is one of the best examples of early CGI. It's not perfect, but it is stylized and looks great for its time. For reference, probably the best TV CGI I've seen around this time would come from Invader Zim, as they perfectly kept the CGI in color and theme of the animated style, which isn't always the case, as in Code Lyoko. Code Lyoko, on the other hand, is representing a virtual world, so it already should look different from the real world. In this case, they have more freedom to make it look any way they want. Today, we can say that sure, some areas are a little bit simple, but it still looks good to me. This is what I meant by best of both worlds. It is a balancing act to make both the 2D and 3D animations look good without losing quality in either one. Of course, shows can cut corners, especially when there are certain things that the characters do all the time, such as running to the factory, sitting in a rotating chair, or loading into the virtual world. Repeating animations is nothing new, it's something animators have been doing for forever, including Disney. So that alone isn't a standard to criticize. What would be is how often they rely on said animation. Overall, in my own opinion, I feel Code Lyoko passes on both. The first season can look a little rough, but even towards the tail end of the same season, the CGI portions are a lot more animated. As a whole, there's a certain pace and storytelling that Code Lyoko has that can keep my interest and nothing really distracts me from enjoying the show. Speaking of storytelling, the show is very quick. Each episode is about 20 minutes long, but you'd swear it was 15 or less. This is both a good and a bad thing, as sometimes a story element can feel rushed and not fully thought out. Using the same episode 2 from season 1, the subplot was the team was forming a band and needed a drummer. Well, it so happens that the best drummer in school is teamed up with a girl named Sissy. Sissy is essentially the Angelica of the group, constantly getting in the way of the main characters. The problem is that the subplot only has 2 scenes, to try out at the beginning and then to practice with the drummer at the end, completely skipping over the dialogue of coming to terms with each other that you would otherwise see in a show like Hey Arnold. It's more of an implied moral than one that actually tells you what they're doing. For a show like this, it's not a big deal, but I have to point out what doesn't work. I love this show, I love the pacing of it, the overall idea, and the execution. It's also kind of funny since a lot of my videos also go right to the point, and I try not to just rant on about different things to extend the length of the video. I wonder if this show had anything to do about that. Anyways, it's not easy for me to say outright, yes, this part of the show is bad, but I think that does come down to how inviting the show felt at the time. Just typing code Lyoko into YouTube search instantly gives you video after video of people talking about this show. I know that kind of sounds obvious, but there are other shows that don't have this kind of feedback, and for one that felt like it disappeared after it wrapped up, it's nice to see others still talking about it to this day. There was an attempt to bring the series back with Code Lyoko Evolution, however I don't recommend checking that out. In an attempt to save the budget, the 2D animation was replaced with live action. This was not a good idea, and I honestly could not sit through an episode. I probably could if I really wanted to, but it felt too different. So the characters and the way they look are now completely changed, because of the live action bits. But in CGI, they look like their original selves. I feel this was too much of a disconnect, and child acting can come off as too corny. The dialogue in Code Lyoko is quite basic, so moving that into live action could make it feel too stilted and forced. Fortunately, the show continued through novels that follow the characters after season 4 of the show. However, there doesn't seem like we'll have a reboot or a continuation of a new animated show anytime soon. The creator group, Moonscoop, filed for bankruptcy in 2014. Maybe one day,
Xana will come back.
and there'll be more adventures. But until then, I am Mr. Rain, and thank you for watching.